This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy, and you got to read this guy. We've had him on the show before. Crispin Sartwell, he's an associate professor of philosophy at Dickinson College. His book is Entanglements, A System of Philosophy, and he's penned another good op-ed in the Wall Street Journal this week about Facebook. He poses the question, Mark Zuckerberg or Chinese President Xi Jinping, who do you choose? He chooses Zuckerberg, and he'll explain why. Crispin Sartwell, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Be here, Dan.
So what's worse than Facebook? And your answer is the Chinese government. It's a pretty low bar or high bar, depending on your perspective. But why do you choose Zuckerberg over President Xi?
Well, okay. I mean, this is people have been freaking out about social media companies and Facebook, Apple, Google, etc. And I think we should be worried about them in various ways, and what's happening to our information, and then also the disinformation and so on that comes through these platforms and stuff. But I would think that sort of obviously the biggest threat on the internet is governments, okay, in terms of hacking, in terms of launching viruses, in terms of surveillance, and in terms of disinformation, all right? So, and the obvious model of it is the Chinese government now, which is really instituted an extent of control over communications that's unprecedented, and is generating this social credit system where they're monitoring all your communications and rating your conformity and rewarding or penalizing you for it. Now, that strikes me as a much greater kind of threat overall than anything Facebook or Google could do with your information.
Right, and so this is and this is relevant. Of course, we've had the hearings with the various social media CEOs, including Zuckerberg last year.
Yes, and
people are rightly concerned about privacy and
indeed,
and contract integrity. You say you're doing this, but you're or not doing this,
yes,
but you're not being honest with me. So we understand.
Absolutely.
We should understand Facebook, Twitter, et cetera. We're the product. But you're suggesting it's better that we're the product privately than it is we're the product from the state's perspective.
Yeah, roughly. I mean, I think we need to be concerned with both, and we definitely need to be concerned with the intersection of the two. So that, I think that you're going to see more and more regulation of Facebook and, other such companies. And then almost a merger of this kind of surveillance apparatus and personal information gathering apparatus. And, so, the other thing is that Zuckerberg really has seemed quite incompetent, okay?
Yeah.
He's kind of this vague tech boy. There always seem to be a year behind the problems that they're generating or whatever. And, in a way, I'm happier with that kind of incompetence than sort of the implacable, gigantic bureaucracy that China is generating, with some of the same kinds of goals, I suppose.
Because the market punishes incompetence.
Yes, I hope so eventually.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that is a question right now, right? Like, what would Facebook have to do to go out of business? You know what I mean? Like, what degree of incompetence could they manifest that would drive them out of business? But yes, I'd like to see market forces. I think in principle, market forces are capable of correcting some of those problems, but they're definitely not capable. Nothing is capable of correcting the kinds of problems on the internet that the Chinese government is generating.
Right.
There is no mechanism by which, you can't boycott it. You can't take your business elsewhere. So yeah, I think we're better off in a free market atmosphere to the extent that we have that, but because we have these really monopolistic companies. It's coming down to just a few companies, and that's probably not the best situation.
As a philosophy professor, you're charged with answering the question, "What is truth?" And I
No problem.
Yeah, and I know you've written on this topic very interestingly. But I wanted to get your reaction to a statement that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez made on Sunday night in her interview on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, where she was sort of softly challenged by Anderson about the things that she has said that have been like wildly factually incorrect, like things like the Pentagon budget being off by a factor of 25.
Right. What did she say? $21 trillion or something like that?
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And her response was essentially, it's more important to be morally right on the issue than it is to be technically correct.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like a lot of our discourse is along those lines. And, you could say morally right, or you could say rhetorically convincing. Like, in other words, I think she's not just misstating facts. She's trying to convince people with misstatements of fact. But that's not only happening on her side of the spectrum. Let's put it that way.
Right. Sure.
But
the cultural implications of that in our political discourse.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I think it's impossible and disgusting, really. I mean, if you don't have a factual basis for policymaking, and if you actually regard that as irrelevant, I don't really want to listen to anything you say after that. I mean, I don't know what problems you think you're going to address. Or, I don't trust what you're telling me about maybe even the results of some kind of policy change or whatever. So I think that if someone really reveals that they are indifferent to the truth, I would simply stop listening to them. They continue to make factual claims, right? They continue to tell you what they believe or whatever in terms of like what the situation is on the ground that they're trying to address. So they seem to be making assertions, but I wouldn't even interpret that. They're telling you that they don't even care about whether what they're saying is true. At that point, they should just be kind of waved off, I think.
Right. You would hope there would be a market correction there, too.
Yeah.
I wanted to check back with you, like do a little bit of a stop, look, and listen to where you think we're at in the denunciad. You wrote an op-ed a couple of years ago that I really enjoyed. And actually, another academic, you probably know, Anthony Esselin, writes about the same topic in his latest book, Out of the Ashes. And he talks about truly tolerant people are hard to offend because they're not looking to score points. They're not looking to bring others into ill repute. He writes, an owl is not offended by the little field mouse. It's just what the owl is on the lookout for. And the difference is in the denunciad, as you wrote about, we are on the lookout to be offended, and thus we're offended, and it becomes this spiraling. And I wonder if you think that since you opined on that topic, things are improving or continuing to deteriorate.
Oh, I think it continues to deteriorate. Although I do think there's a little correction happening. Like, for example, I mean, a really good example of this whole thing was the Kevin Hart flap on the Oscars.
Yeah.
And to the point now where they're basically like they're lost. No one can host the Oscars. I don't think anyone – I doubt that anyone can really reach the degree of purity necessary to host the Oscars. And probably no one has a good enough multiracial, multisexual identity, to be the host of the Oscars and represent everyone correctly or something, or whatever is demanded. But, yeah, I mean, so I think, like, it has become automatic. So you uncover these tweets by Hart, you expose them, you demand an apology. He kind of ritually apologizes, or, who knows exactly what happened there. I haven't been paying that close attention. But then I think it's a little encouraging that in this case, it doesn't just seem to be, okay, that's the end of your career, or come back in 2 years and try for a comeback or something like that. At least there's some defense. There's some sense of, okay, I think for one reason is that people like Kevin Hart.
Yeah, well, right. Yeah, yeah. Your likability factor matters a lot. The different standards attached. But on this point, though, speaking of Kevin Hart, he's in this new movie with Bryan Cranston. I think it's actually getting worse, and I think there is not so much of a correction going on. Yes, Kevin Hart survived.
Yeah.
He had some intemperate tweets or whatever, although he is a comedian. But Bryan Cranston is out defending himself as an actor playing a man in a wheelchair because he's not actually in a wheelchair.
Yes.
And it's like, do you understand the concept of an actor? So
absolutely.
So to me, that's the kind of stuff that's really concerning.
Yes, I agree with that completely. And I mean, I kind of think of it as the representation wars. So the idea is that every movie has to kind of perfectly represent American demographics. Every actor has to be selected in terms of their own identity and so on. It's impossible. It's with authors as well. Like, could I write a fictional character who's in a wheelchair?
Right.
See, that, if I was building my next novel around a character like that, okay, that's just an excellent, if I could do that well, I would be a fine novelist. But I would definitely get condemned by, for purporting to represent or embody a community that I don't. But of course, I never purported that at all. As you say, like Bryan Cranston is an actor. That's exactly what we used to reward actors for being able to do. Like enter into the experience of someone who is disabled and present it so that we can understand it. I think it's getting absurd.
How much is higher ed the responsible party and perhaps the source of some correction?
Well, I'm not sure. I'll say this, that idea that all representations are potentially threatening and every representation has to be kind of, whether it's a book or a professor's lecture or a movie or whatever, has to be perfectly calibrated demographically and so on. That rages on college campuses now. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's more intense there than in the culture as a whole. I'm not sure if it emerged from there or if it just kind of, came there and and settled in. But it's really extreme. And, so any movie that you're showing at the student union or whatever is liable to be examined multiply in that way and protested perhaps, and things like that. And one thing I think is that people are just really quite confused about the relation of representation to reality. So I think you could get all the representations exactly politically correct. Like, say you had just all movies were perfectly demographically arranged and all the actors were the right sorts of people and so on. I don't think that would solve any of the problems of the society. And I think that's been demonstrated historically. So, for example, like in the Soviet Union, all you're getting is the portrayal of inspiring workers marching victoriously into a future bright with promise, okay? Mm-hmm. Every medium, all the time. That didn't make it true. That just made all those presentations grotesquely false. Right? That didn't change the situation on the ground. Like, we're not going to solve American racism with the right movies, okay?
Right.
And I think people really misunderstand this. Like, it just seems obvious to me that that's not the most effective mode of activism or not where the problem lies, really.
He is Crispin Sartwell. He's associate professor of philosophy at Dickinson College, and his book, Entanglements, A System of Philosophy. Also check out his piece on Facebook and the Chinese government, the Wall Street Journal. Crispin, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Dan. Appreciate it.
Take care. And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.